All right, Ken, thanks for being here, man. You're a bail bondsman and an attorney. How do those things go together?
Well, I'm not really a bail bondsman. I'm an attorney for bail bondsmen, but I'm on the board of directors for the association. So that's a common conclusion. But no, I don't post bonds. I just do the legal work.
Gotcha, gotcha. And so, as a bail bonds attorney, what does that entail?
Well, for Texas, which is where I'm Texas counsel, I would say it's really just solving problems. So, getting people licensed. If there's an issue on licensure, then I will step in. If there's a problem or a complaint, then I will represent the bondsman. And then the rest is just, main mundane stuff, bond forfeiture. So, when someone fails to appear for court, there's a big paperwork shuffle to make sure that the right judgment's entered. And so, other than that, it's just a lot of it administrative stuff, answering questions. I probably get 200 emails a day, and I answer a lot of questions.
Gotcha. And for people who don't understand how cash bail works, can you kind of walk us through how that process happens? Somebody gets, arrested for, say a DUI and they want to bond out. How does the process work?
Well, okay, so the process, like what you're saying, is probably similar throughout the states, but the types of options available to post, those are different from states to state because bail's regulated by the states. So, you go before a magistrate, you see a magistrate, a judge sets bond. In Texas, a bond has to be set. It has to have a financial amount to it because that's part of what a bond is. And then the defendant can decide whether in Texas they post a cash bond, which is the full amount of the bond with the court. So if it's a $10,000 bond, you post $10,000, or you can go to the private industry and you can post a private surety bond, so they're posting the amount of the bond where they're promising to pay in exchange for a premium, just like a premium on insurance on your car. And it is like premium because we're guaranteeing appearance. That's the reason why if you fail to appear, we end up paying the court because we're guaranteeing that you will appear for court. A lot of people think that, this has something to do, or we should take into consideration innocence or guilt at this stage, but that's been litigated many, many decades ago, or a decade ago. The innocence or guilt at trial. This pretrial is what assurance that you're going to give that you're going to show up to answer the charges. Back before the Magna Carta, all the way back to England, the king had the right to hold anybody until trial. And if if the crown decided never go to trial, then you just got held. But since the Magna Carta, the king agreed that people had the right to release as long as they gave assurance that they were going to show back up. So the system of what bail is what assurance you're going to give the court that you're going to return. And then if you're on a private surety bond, there's going to be a lot of supervision. You're going to check in periodically. You may have to come into the office to check in. You may have an app. The app may require you to take a picture, and when you take that picture, it may give you your GPS location so they'll know where you're located. So I think that's probably a pretty big overview. Now, when you get to other states, they may have different types of release. So we call, in Texas, we call personal bonds is simple release. It's where you're just being released on your promise. So we have a cash bond, a private surety bond, or a personal bond. Other places may call it something different, but they're all very similar. It's just a promise. Your promise that you'll show up. Before COVID, the activists all said, we don't need the private surety bail industry because everybody wants to come back to court. Everybody wants to get their cases resolved. And we found out very quickly during COVID, because during that time we tried a bunch of these strategies and we found that nobody wanted to come back to court. These simple release mechanisms come with a very high failure to appear rate.
Gotcha. And so, if you do have somebody who's able to post bond on their own, they don't need to go to a bondsman. They have the $10,000 cash, and then they show up to court. They do everything right. Do they get their full $10,000 back, or does the court take a portion of that?
The court would take a small portion of it as an administrative fee, but again, that would depend on state to state. But generally, I would say in the states that allow that, if they get your money, they're going to take a small cut before they return it.
Gotcha. And you mentioned some states having no cash bail. How did that go during COVID?
Well, what I said was that tried a lot of these simple release mechanisms and we put them like on steroids during COVID. I think, let's see, there's a county in California, Yolo County, that kept all their data, and then they compared someone that was released on simple release versus somebody that was released on a private surety bond. And they found that the person that was released on simple release had a 200% greater chance, all things being the same, of being arrested on a new violent offense in the next 18 months. So, the type of release matters.
That's fine. I used to live in Yolo County in California, so
Oh, really?
I'm not surprised that information came out.
Well, and I heard recently that the DA resigned, because he's just trying to do what's right, but he's always under attack for trying to do what's right, which is probably true for everything in California. If you try to do what's right, then everybody's going to attack you because nobody's getting their cut.
Yeah, exactly. I think Yolo County also during COVID had a woman that was released early by Gavin Newsom. She had kidnapped, tortured, and murdered somebody in a hotel room, and they let her out early, and she was only, I want to say she was 45 or 50. She did not serve much time. That California can get a little crazy with criminal justice.
Well, and everything they do in California, they do it under this lie that, releasing more criminals will make us safer. And and that's what it is. It's a lie. It's just they don't want to spend any more money to build more jails. So they're going to just release more criminals and, shock, more crime.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's the only motivation, that they just don't want to spend money for jails, or you think there's something else going on here?
I think there's several things going on, but it's a backdoor method used by the activists that we're seeing in several areas where they refuse to build additional prisons, and that causes the state or the county to do criminal justice bail reform because they don't have any choice. California, the courts capped the number of people that could be held in their prison system, and it's because they wouldn't build additional prisons and they had too many hardcore criminals in the jail. So they started passing bills to release them, and it's because they wouldn't build additional capacity, which, a state like California that's kind of ruled by the activists on the far left, a politician would get skewered if they propose building additional prisons. I mean, look at Arnold Schwarzenegger set aside billions of dollars to do that, but it never got implemented, never got spent to do that. And so that's where we are. I mean, I would say if you take a step back, the policies in California are all arise from that. And, that case where they capped the number of people in their prison went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And I would say the dissent in that case is probably the majority of the court now because of the changes. But the dissent at the time said when you release essentially a brigade of criminals back into the public, it shouldn't, the result will be more crime. And that's been the result every time it's happened. And I think that has been the result when they did that.
Mm-hmm. And California has no aversion to spending public money. So I understand what you're saying. I thought it was a great point that they use this not building any more jails as this backdoor into bail reform. That was an astute point. I hadn't heard that before. I think that's absolutely right. But since they're going to spend public money anyway, there's got to be some motivation, even if it's, from the activist point of view, of why they want more criminals on the street. Do you know why they want this?
Well, I think first of all, you have to look at the county and probably the state. The largest budget items are criminal justice. And so if they can decrease the criminal justice budget, then they can have more money for social programs. And but California, I would even say it's probably more sinister to that. They have more money for NGOs that say they're treating social programs, but then the money doesn't get used for that. It just kind of disappears and probably goes into somebody's pocket. I mean, look at all the money that's been spent on homelessness now under court supervision, and how much has been actually spent on buying homes or building homes for the homeless. It's just it's just crazy. It's just mostly talking points, focused driven jargon to try to justify the spending. And so I think first you've got these people who think, well, we need to cut their budget so we can spend that more on social programs. And I say, and then there are part of the coalition that is nefarious because they don't believe in prisons. They don't believe anybody should go to jail, and they believe prison or jails are cages. And it's like we shouldn't have any laws for precluding these actions. And it's just silly. I mean, it's just silly. And I think that's a really good point you asked. Well, why would they do that? And I think, it started with, well, we're going to do these in Democrat areas. We're going to show how well it works, and then we're going to be able to broaden it to the rest of the country. Well, it's been a big failure, but they can't admit it was a big failure because the activists will never allow them to say it was a failure. So now they're in a box. They're in a box because they've tried it. It didn't work. They know it didn't work, but the activists won't allow them. And what I mean by that is if they were to be silly enough to admit publicly it didn't work, well, suddenly they would have another activist candidate pop up against them in the primary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. And it's really interesting, the criminal justice debate. It seems to be only seriously had on the right. Like if you go into a lot of right-wing circles, there are people debating whether we should have this hard crackdown on crime, and then you'll have the more libertarian folks on the other side, arguing for civil liberties. You see this debate with the flock cameras, just as one example. But the left has kind of sat this debate out and kind of stuck their head in the sand and said, no, there's no crime problem. You can ignore the evidence of your eyes and ears. And I just think that that's really interesting that the left is just going to sit this whole debate out. I don't get, and as someone that lives in California, I don't get it. I don't understand why, as you mentioned, this happens in liberal areas.
But this is what's happened before. I mean, we're repeating the same cycle that we did in the 60s. We felt more safe. We were more forgiving on our criminal laws. Crime started going up. We started having to debate what to do about it. One party refused to participate, thinking that we can keep it from happening. And as a result, we ended up having a backlash, and we ended up having Reagan elected on the war on drugs. I would say Trump 2.0 is kind of the same thing with the addition of immigration policy. I mean, we have immigration and criminal justice reform are very much intertwined. They're the same politics.
Yeah, and I think that's true too. And it didn't used to be, when immigration was on a smaller scale, you could make the argument that it didn't have a big effect on crime. But with 10 million people coming in under Joe Biden, it is going to have a big effect. Even if you take the numbers that the left puts forward, that only a small portion of those people commit crimes. Out of 10 million, that ends up being a large raw number. So.
Yeah, but they're cooking the books. I mean, they're actually cooking the books on those because they take both the legal and illegal immigrants and mix them all together to get the result they want. I mean, that's the problem with looking at any numbers from the activists. They're all cooking the books. I mean, they had so many pseudo studies that were issued in the in the run up on the last election, and they kept saying, crime is not going up. Don't believe your eyes. Crime is not going up, and you don't have to believe us. You don't have to believe our pseudo study. You can just look at the FBI statistics. And I wrote an article last October saying why the FBI statistics were all not correct. They just weren't. They weren't finished. They were incomplete because they were changing over to a new system. All the reporting organizations had to buy new equipment to report, and so the largest law enforcement agencies hadn't bought the new equipment yet, and so probably 10 days after I wrote my article, they had updated the statistics from the FBI, and suddenly crime was increased. And so then the activists couldn't talk about crime anymore the rest of the election. So they switched and started yelling, Trump is a fascist, Trump is Hitler, because they couldn't talk about crime anymore. And it was just yell, 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 try to distract. And so I think we're at the point where you can't really take any numbers from the activists with anything other than a grain of salt.
Yeah, and with California, we ran into something similar with the proposition that reduced the standard for felony theft. It set it to $900, anything under $950 was going to be a misdemeanor. And then Gavin Newsom pointed to statistics later and said, hey, robberies and theft has gone down. That's awesome. But what we were really looking at was people weren't reporting the thefts as much because they knew the police weren't going to do anything. You could go to San Francisco and watch people stealing, garbage bags full of things from a Walgreens, and they wouldn't even call the police.
Well, I think that's a great point. When they passed Proposition 47, they changed certain felonies, like the one that you mentioned, from felonies to misdemeanors, saying, oh, well, they'll still have to answer for their charges. And the point you're making is, I would carry it even further and saying, well, those were no longer crimes, so they just didn't get counted in the statistics. And the reason why they weren't crimes anymore is because when it got downgraded to a misdemeanor, the urban areas, the problem areas, the DAs said, well, we're no longer going to prosecute those crimes. And that's when it really took off. And, you started having $25,000 a day of shoplifting at a store. Stores can't withstand $25,000 a day. I mean, if you talk to Mamdani in New York, you would think that the bad, evil corporations have an obligation to lose $25,000 a day. I mean, that's just, toxic rhetoric again, where they're going to third world countries to see how people won elections, and that they're trying to copy that into the United States. And you've got this Democrat socialist group that's going out and actually recruiting candidates that meet this criteria. They look good, they sound good, and they'll do whatever they're told.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that with Mamdani because not that they did this intentionally, but the group that brought Mamdani here was the CIA. His family was, I think it was, his family was brought here on some CIA program, and that's why he ended up getting here on some expedited green card. So we can.
Yeah, but isn't that true for any group? If there was a Democrat in the White House, they would have allowed anybody in and given them a fast track to something. I mean, you don't look at the CIA, look at who was in the White House at the time you came in.
But to your point too, I thought this was, interesting. In Sacramento, when we saw Prop 47 pass, some stores went out of business, chains left, Walgreens, Target, they were leaving big areas, and the activists in Sacramento were trying to force the chains to stay open because they said, it was racist for them to leave these majority black areas. And the whole thing's just so backwards. Instead of fixing the crime, they decided to try and force the businesses to stay open. It was nuts, completely insane.
Well, and and you're right, it is insane. But the reason why they reacted that way is because that's the only option they had. They couldn't admit that there was a crime problem, because if they admitted there was a crime problem, the activists would have come unglued on them. They would have had an opponent. They'd be out of business, and their business is politics. So the only thing they could do is blame the evil chains for losing money. I mean, you can't even provide your private security to enforce state law on your own property, because you'll get in trouble for that. I mean, that's really where we are. And, I think Trump 2.0 is showing such a disparity in the blue and the red states or areas that disparity is going to get bigger and bigger, and it can't last for very long. It will collapse. And I think that's one of the reasons why you're seeing the desperation on the left. I mean, if you think about it, they're winning with socialist candidates only in the really, really blue areas, which is, if you're a rubber band, you're pulling the rubber band further and further and stretching it further and further, and it eventually will pop. And they're trying to to reinforce all the things that are falling apart. I read an article that was really good talking about all the right-wing candidates winning in South America, and they were saying, well, the NGO money went away. And once the NGO money went away, then the left-wing candidates' ability to win went away. I think that's really what we're seeing, and you're seeing a lot of desperation on the left. And I know we're here to talk about criminal justice, but it bleeds into the criminal justice fight as well. Because you look at this and you go, well, why would they do this? Why would they do this? And, look at the immigration. Why would they do this? Why would they do this? And it's like their party is getting to the point where they're chasing out everybody that doesn't agree with them. I mean, Texas has always been a conservative state, even if it was a Democrat. So they've chased out the conservatives. They've now chased out the moderates, and now they're chasing out pretty much everybody else that doesn't meet certain, we used to have, we would criticize a president if he seemed like he had a conditions for appointing people to the U.S. Supreme Court. Not anymore, but I mean, that's where the activists are. You have to be purebred. You have to believe these list of things, or you will not win in that party. Well, that can't last very long, because we're not a party of extremists. We're pretty much right of center, but they've done a really good job of, if the right of center or conservative people open their mouth, they get attacked even if it's not fair. So they've really taught people to not speak. And I think Trump doesn't care, but Trump has withstood the biggest attack that they could ever throw at anyone, and I don't think any other Republican would have been able to survive that attack. And somebody made a comment in an article which I agree with. We're going to be watching movies about the Trump presidencies probably for the rest of our lives, and I do think that's true.
100%. We're living through a political revolution right now, one that's never happened in my lifetime, and it's really interesting. It's a really fun time.
But I think it's better than a revolution. I think we've had the revolution where the activists have thrown fits, and the moderates have sided with them, hoping that would calm them down, and it didn't. And so now we're living through a period where we're fighting back. The rest of the country is saying enough is enough, and we're pushing back against the activists, and the activists have never faced that before. It's like when you stand up to a bully. So I think we're actually in a period of, Return of the Jedi, I guess, for the Star Wars analogies. We've lived through the Empire Strikes Back, and now we're having the Return of the Jedi.
I love the Star Wars reference. It worked so well with the Trump presidency, Trump coming in as the New Hope, and then the Empire Striking Back with Biden's election.
Yes.
And here we are.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy. I hadn't thought of it before, but it tells you when I grew up with all those movies.
Yeah. And, the NGO money, to your point of the leftists losing in South America now, I worry that because eventually I think we're going to see a Democrat president again. I don't think we're just going to see Republicans for the rest of our lives. But when the Democrats do return to power, that the blue states losing a bunch of people, losing their tax base, the NGO money drying up, that once that faucet's turned back on, they're just going to be able to gain power and go right back to it. And I think they're going to blow up the filibuster and implement national election law, where they're going to say, hey, you can't demand ID for anybody. There has to be universal mail-in ballots, and we're going to see another, I think it was 88 million votes that Joe Biden got, more than any president's ever gotten in history by far. And that's what I really worry about.
Well, I mean, obviously I worry about that too, but if we look at, I think if we want to look at what's going to happen in the future, we should look back at what has happened in the past. And so I think probably the more likely result is the Democrats will be forced to moderate at some point. And so if they don't, they risk becoming a regional party, which they have been in the past, where they can win in areas of the country, but they can't win a national election. So we have decades, where it was difficult for them to win the presidency. And so if they're not careful, And if they continue pushing to the left, we could get to that point. The exception is if what you said about just throwing out election laws and making them just easy to cheat. And so my hope is, and I think history would say that they will be forced to moderate, maybe with another loss or two, and then that will, so that the next Democrat president is a moderate. The problem that we have right now is everybody who runs is going to try to say they're a moderate. I mean, look at Biden. He ran as a moderate, but then once he came into the White House, he turned the keys over to the activists. So, I mean, if I was just Joe Blow voter, I wouldn't believe a Democrat saying they're an activist. I mean, prove it to me. Don't tell me. I mean, sorry, I wouldn't believe them if they said they were a moderate, because I mean, their parties are not a moderate, and they don't have room for moderates. And the old geezers still in there are only there because the activists haven't taken them out. I mean, look at Schumer. I don't know if Schumer can even win a re-election. And so he's going to have to kowtow and bend over to the activists, or he's going to lose. And so I don't think a moderate can be president in the Democrat Party right now. And I think that until the party moderates, it's going to be difficult for them to win a national election, I hope.
Mm-hmm. And what really scares me is if you look at the Democrats' bench right now, it's a lot of extremists, and the top one is an extremist who posts as a moderate. It's Gavin Newsom. He has his podcast. He sat down with Charlie Kirk. He sits down with these other, he had his debate with Ron DeSantis, and he's trying to position himself in that moderate lane. And I can tell you from living under Gavin Newsom for nearly 8 years now, he's no moderate. The dude is a full-on socialist. And
I don't think he can get elected. I don't think well, I mean, look, if you look at the last couple of cycles in the Democrat Party, I would argue that the extreme candidate was cheated from winning in the primaries. Mm-hmm. And if you look at Maine, they allowed the activists to win, but now they're taking it away from him, and they're going to try to give it to someone more palatable to the elites. And so I would say that's where we are on, one party is they can't win if they let the activists win the nomination. So Hillary I don't think that was a fair fight. Bernie Sanders would have won that if it had been a fair fight. Against Biden, Bernie Sanders would have won if it had been a fair fight. And they didn't even try to have a fair fight with the most recent candidate, with Harris. I mean, they just pronounced that she was going to be the candidate. The problem with Hillary, she's kind of a moderate. So, I mean, but that's the point. Bernie Sanders was the activist. She was the moderate, so they got her. The next one, same thing. Biden was the moderate, professed, but then when he got in office, he turned the keys over. So I think we're at the point where a proposed moderate or supposed moderate can't win the nomination in the Democrat Party. And if they try to manipulate again, their party's just going to come unglued on them. Because it's not going to be Bernie Sanders getting in line and they're going to be able to get him to do whatever they want. It's going to be like an AOC. It's going to be a true believer, and they're not going to get in line. So, but that's where I think their party is. And that's going to be difficult. So it's going to be fun to watch. I mean, they keep saying the Republicans are fighting, but there's no fight going on like the Democrat Party right now. And I would say the moderates have lost. And so how do they go forward with just their activist core running the party? And we'll see. I think they'll chase off a lot of people. And they're in the process of chasing off the law and order part of the party. I mean, even who is the guy that has a show that said if so-and-so, if they're going to take these positions, then my vote's in play. I mean.
Oh, I don't recall. There have been a lot of Democrats like that. Who especially over the Israel conflict have, rethought their support for the Democratic Party. But your point about the Democratic primaries is a good one, because not only was Bernie Sanders cheated out of his election, which is an interesting point, because there was, 2016 was the populist wave. A lot of people think that Trump came in and like brought populism to America, but that's not what happened. Populism was already coming because on the heels of Obama, and you could see that because Bernie Sanders was so popular on the left, but the Democratic Party suppressed him and his voters, many of whom ended up going and voting for Trump. And so now what you're seeing in, this coming 2028 election and a little bit in 2024 as well with the election of Mondani is that the left-wing version of populism is coming back. And it's because the Democratic Party has no leader and they don't have the hold they used to. Nancy Pelosi is essentially out the door. And so they're not able to suppress those candidates like they used to be. So we're really going to be set up for this battle for the populist wing of America because they're not as partisan as we're used to, the older generations. They're not loyal to the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. If you're able to switch from Bernie Sanders to Trump, you're not loyal to one political party.
Yeah, and it's a party of personalities. I mean, it's, the election turns on personalities. Trump is a huge personality, and you take his personality away and his sense of humor, and I'm not sure his supporters just fall in line to the next, Democrat at the time. Now with Vance and with our Secretary of State, I mean, I think it's, they're going to go to them naturally. And it's going to be an interesting fight on the Republican side because Vance and the Secretary of State are natural allies, but they also ideologically are a little bit different and come from different factions of the party. And if you look at it, you would see, I mean, the MAGA is going to go to Vance, but the party elites will probably go to the Secretary of State. But I would say, the younger one is Vance, so I would really like to see him be vice president again for the Secretary of State because I think he's a sure hand. But the sure hand is also foreign policy, and foreign policy doesn't usually win elections, might win the primary. But how does that affect our criminal justice reform? How does that affect bail reform across the country? And, when the activists get in control, they create chaos. They create, they think it's unfair that people are in jail. We should not have jails. I mean, look at Oregon, where they had this period of time where they decriminalized all heavy drugs. It was going to be such a success, and it was a complete and utter failure, and such a failure they wouldn't renew it when it came up for renewal. I mean, they were setting record numbers of overdoses every month. And so, I mean, it's like, what is your job as a policeman? It's not to bring somebody back from overdosing so they can then go back and get their next hit from their dealer. That's not your job. And if you don't have the hammer of the criminal justice system, then you can't get these people to just decide to voluntarily go into treatment. And so I think that's the lesson from there. And so I would also say we know what works, criminal justice. I mean, these activists like to say things, they like to give out pseudo studies, but it's just crap. We know what works. We know how to get crime to go down, and they're just fighting that, and they fight it for all the wrong reasons. And I would say it's just to win one more election. And so if we could get them to lose the next national election, they would start to moderate. But the activists are so entrenched. It may be a while. I mean, they're going to have to go through a little bit of a wilderness, maybe not for 40 years like Moses, but they're going to have to go through a little bit of a wilderness before they will come out. And because they've done this before, they're going to have to lose some national elections and then moderate, and then they will default back to a law and order policy, like a party like the Republicans have always been. And when they do that, then we'll reset for a period of time, and then we'll start the whole cycle again.
Mm-hmm. And I think what they're going to do too is try and use Republican governors and presidents as their excuse. I know I'd read a piece you'd written about Washington, D.C., and how Mayor Bowser was tweeting about how terrible it was. The National Guard was coming, and she was so upset. And then as soon as the National Guard got there, she immediately issued an order to make sure the city completely cooperated with the National Guard. Crime's gone down there. She's happy about it. It seems like Trump really gave her the out against the activists. She was able to throw her hands up and say, no, the president forced me. We've got to cooperate. Oh, no. And then go on and
Yeah, but what was the result? She lost her next election. They brought in a far left activist to run against her, and they won. So, I think the lesson there is disappointing because if you think about it, Trump has no incentive to go into our urban areas. Those are deep blue areas. He has, he gets no benefit from that, but he's doing what he thinks is the right thing. Now, the reason why the reactions have been so violent is because they think, I think wrongly, they thought that if Trump was successful, then they would jeopardize their safe districts. That has not turned out to be true. I think Washington is a good example that it turned out not to be true.
It is tragic. Is there anything that, and there's this really tough dichotomy here where Republicans tend to favor the more federalist idea that the national government shouldn't be sending the National Guard or the military into every city with a crime problem because we believe in states' rights and we believe in local governments. But Democrats have no problem doing that. So is there any way for us to show these deep blue areas that, take Chicago, that Democrats have been in charge of for 60 years? Is it politically expedient for a Republican to send the National Guard into a city like that and prove, hey, there is an alternative out there, that there can be law and order if you ignore what the activists are telling you and do that from a national level? Because we're not saying Republicans are going to go and win in Chicago, but does Trump have a point here? Is this a way to show people in deep blue cities that the Republican law and order way can be effective?
Well, yes, I do. But I think it's worse than you're even suggesting. I think, and especially Chicago, the city politicians have turned over parts of that city to the gangs. The politicians don't run Chicago, the gangs do. And you know that when they're getting ready for an election and the politicians and the press is reporting that the politicians are meeting with gangs to facilitate, areas and how to vote and stuff like that. It's like, your city's not run by you. Your city's run by the gangs. And when you have so many people shot on the weekends, it's because of the gang violence that they're not even addressing. And so I would say like Chicago's a good example where the activists and the gangs are holding the politicians hostage. It's another example of the politicians know what's going on, in my opinion. They know how to correct it, but they can't do anything about it because they're being held hostage. And in Chicago, they're being held hostage by gangs and the activists. And, I don't know. It's almost like the parties could crumble, but, the Democrat Party could actually crumble. I was thinking that if Sanders had started a third party, that would have facilitated that, but he didn't do it. He ran within the party structure, and he would have won. And I think that's the lesson of Trump, because Trump met with the Perot family when he was trying to decide whether to run, and he was talking to them about, well, what if I start a third party? And they were like, no, learn from us. You even if you get a whole bunch of votes, the structure is so entrenched. You have to go within the structure or it's going to be impossible for you to win. And I think that is the lesson. So Trump won within the existing structure. Sanders probably would have won the nomination within the existing structure. But the reason why the party prevented him from getting it is because they probably accurately realized that if they ran him as the party candidate, they would have lost probably by large margins at that time. And so now we're at the point where the party thinks that if they have an active, that if, they haven't gone left enough, that's the reason why they haven't won. They just haven't gone far left enough. And if they're just true to their real beliefs, then, their true beliefs of, which I don't even know what their true beliefs are, because when you look at the criminal justice reforms they want, the very people they say they're going to help, that's the people they hurt the worst, because by and large, we commit crime within our, within our racial groups. So if they're going to, be forgiving more on crime for certain racial groups, then that's going to increase crime within that racial groups. It's kind of like they want to go back to a period of time where, There's a reason why we have a disproportionate amount of crime by certain racial groups, and that's because historically we had a period of time where we didn't care. We didn't care about crime in certain minority groups as long as it was the same, they were keeping it amongst themselves. So you can pick on certain minorities as long as, you just minority on minority crime. And that's why for a period of time, we just didn't care. Well, we started caring. And so we started fighting it. And that's why we have had a disproportionate amount of people in jail from those minority groups, because we were ignoring that crime for a long time, because of our history. And so when they say we're being racist, and that's the reason why we have a disproportionate amount of people in jail, that's not true. I mean, there's studies that show that what the reason why is because we started caring. And it seems like they want to go back to a period of time where they just want to unleash crime on those same minorities, because their policies will hurt those groups the most. And they're still advocating that that's what that we need to do.
And tragically, violent crime is the argument against the justice system is racist, or
but I mean, the 50% of all
policing.
But 50% of all murder victims in the United States are young black males, and by and large, the people who kill them are young black males as well. So how in the debate on criminal justice reform and bail reform did we decide to favor young black male murderers over young black male decedents? I mean, no, it's crazy.
And it's, you can't make the argument that, that statistic you just gave, right there about, violent crime being disproportionately committed by African Americans. You can't say that that's because of over-policing or racist justice system, because we have a victim right here, and typically they are black. And so you're right. You can't just say, oh, well, the justice system's racist. That's why this guy has...
Well, I have a problem with that. Like in Chicago, when you go into the courtroom, the bailiff's black, the court reporter's black, the judge is black, both attorneys are black, and they're still saying there's systemic racism. No, there's not. I mean, when everybody in the whole crime is black, then and the jury is predominantly black, and they pronounce you guilty and they give you a sentence, that's not racist.
100%. That's a good point, actually. I hadn't thought of that too. And the police officers that arrested them were probably black as well.
That's right. Minnesota started tracking in the last few years the racial makeup in the criminal justice system all the way down to the person who reported the crime. And they found that, on the reporting of crime, 10-1 black minorities. So they arrest 10-1 on certain crimes, black over other racial groups. But the people reporting the crimes are also black. But once they get into the criminal justice system, it flips. They get better treatment and better results than other racial groups. So they have a 10-1 reporting of crime, but then when they get in, they get a softer impact on crime once they get into the criminal justice system. That probably gives them an incentive to commit more crime, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And so if you took a state, and maybe you have a different state in mind, but I know you live in Texas and they tend to be pretty good on crime. And I know it's more based on locality too, but if you could wave a magic wand and make any changes you wanted to a state that's already pretty good, what would you do to make the bail system just perfect?
Well, the type of release matters. So some of them, like the private industry has less than 10% failure to appear rate. And you can't go forward on the criminal case if the defendant's not there, except in very limited situations. So when you use cash bonds where they post cash with the court, that has like a 25% failure to appear rate. But, once you get to these simple release, they have 50, 60, 70, 80% failure to appear rates. And that shuts down the criminal justice system. And so courts have all this pressure to dismiss cases, because when you get a backlog to a certain level, that's really the only way you can fight backlogs is dismiss cases. And criminals see dismissal of cases as a green light to commit more crime. So just the type of release that you use will impact your ability as a criminal justice system. I mean, can you imagine? You go from a system that has a 10% failure to appear rate to one that has a 50%. You're going to need twice as many courts. And we're not even talking about 60, 70, 80% failure to appear rate. So I would... I think that if your courts truly are there to give justice to victims, you need to rely upon the private industry more under the current system because they have the best They have the best way of getting people to go to court. And so that alone will impact your backlogs. And then after that, I think you want to try some simple release, fine. But you've got to have a very strong hammer of accountability. Like, in Harris County, they have somebody, I've got examples where people were released 17 times and failed to appear in court. And they just kept giving them the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. Well, that's not going to happen. If I was, king for a day, if I was going to give a first-time offender or someone who was poor an opportunity to have simple release, which I'm not sure I would, but if I did, they wouldn't get a second chance, and they sure as heck wouldn't get a third. If they missed court twice, they would be in jail until the case was resolved. And we have some activists would argue and say, you can't do that. If it's a misdemeanor, you can't hold them in jail. I'm like, I'm not holding them in jail because they're poor. I'm holding them in jail because they violate a court order, and I can hold anybody in jail for violating a court order. And so they turn the whole argument on their heads. Their whole goal is to tie the hands of judges. So. And I would say that if people don't do what I told them to do, there would be consequences. Now, for a period of time, there would be more people in jail. But then as the criminals learned my new policies and they learned there were consequences and accountability, they would change their conduct. And then eventually, within 6 months or so, crime would go down. We know that because that's what happened. There's a reported case from Alabama. I had the sheriff on my podcast, and that's exactly what he did. And so I would mirror that. Yeah. And I might discount, if I have some real backlogs, I might discount some punishments to get people to plead guilty, because I think that's better than dismissing cases. But then I would also look at strategies if they have some backlogs to do some temporary courts and spend a bunch of money to get temporary judges, temporary prosecutors, get them in and get the cases resolved. But other than that, until crime is coming down, you need more capacity, because you got to have capacity to hold people accountable. That's kind of what the activists are banking on. Just like they're refusing to build jails in deep blue areas to force reform, same thing. If you don't have the capacity to hold anybody accountable and you have mass accountability issues because of simple release, well, then you can't hold anybody accountable, and that creates more chaos.
Gotcha. Well, Ken, thanks for coming on, man. Can you tell people where to find your podcast, your book, where
Sure.
they can read about you?
Sure. If people want more information about me or our organization, they can go to pbtx.com. pbtx.com. We have a blog where we highlight important criminal justice stories, but we also have our own podcast. There's a link on our menu, or you can just go directly to thebellpost.com. And all we do is talk about criminal justice issues, what works and what doesn't. When AOC says when you defund the police and that makes us safer, then we have a podcast about it where we highlight the studies that say when you defund the police, when you take police out of an area, crime goes up 75%.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Ken. I appreciate it, man.
Sure. Thanks for having me.